Our next teller grew up in Western North Carolina, and that's a very, very, very special place. I grew up there too. She developed a special love for the area and for nature from her botanist mother. Her mother was a botanist. She's a lifelong learner, a mental health therapist, a keen observer of the natural world. Yes, she's a bird watcher, but a whole lot of other things. Her descriptive stories, evoke images. They're original. She tells traditional stories too. And she tells stories on personal topics. Now, I believe tonight she's going to tell a story from her recently published book. There are 26 or 27 stories in that book. I haven't heard them all, but I want to. I want to hear them all. So please welcome to the stage, Catherine Yale Sirota.
Thank you, John. Yes, I think I will tell you 4 stories tonight from my book, An Appalachian Life, A Storyteller's Perspective. And these are all for personal narratives from my own life. Here goes the first one. Let's look at it like this. But in 1982, I married my first husband, Bob. And I knew nothing about making biscuits. And here's why that was important. I was a Southern Appalachian bride, a first-time bride at age 32, and I had no bread-making skills. My husband was a mountain man from Madison County, and he knew biscuits, and I didn't. His wife, Evelyn, was a famous baker, and that put my back up to begin with. Now, we didn't have biscuits in my childhood home. We had toast. It was easy and quick, and we were busy people, so I never learned about the biscuits. And here was Evelyn, who knew everything about baking. So sad. Well, I started with flour, and I added baking powder and baking soda because I was baking, right? So you put that in. And then I threw in a couple tablespoons of salt and a great big old lump of Crisco shortening. And I rounded it out with a couple of eggs and a stick of butter. Well, I started to stir these biscuits, and I stirred, and I stirred, and I stirred, and it wouldn't incorporate. That butter just refused to melt. So I put the bowl in the microwave, and I zapped it on high for 5 minutes. Well, everything boiled up and boiled over. Now I had a real mess to clean up, but I scraped most of it back into the bowl, at least as best as I could. Now I floured the counter liberally. I flung flour on that counter. And the flour was all over me and the counter and the floor. In fact, it sifted down onto every surface in the kitchen. Looked like it snowed a little bit. And it wasn't Alaska. So I got that big lump of dough out of that bowl, and it went plop down in the middle of that flour. I started rolling it around, and I'll tell you what I did. I punched at it a few times as I played in my mind and hummed the theme to Rocky. Do-do-do, pop, pop, do-do-do, pop, pop. Didn't seem to faze the dough any at all. It looked very, very strange. Well, I went to the drawer, and I pulled out a rolling pin. I had gotten it as a wedding present. Some misguided friend who thought I had domestic skills gave it to me. Well, I started to roll at those biscuits, roll. And it was so tough, I couldn't roll it out. The dough just rolled up on the pin, and it stuck fast. Now what to do? Next great inspiration. I reached into that drawer and got out a big butcher knife. I was going to cut the dough off that rolling pin. I cut and I cut and I cut. Oh, that dough was so stubborn it wouldn't come off, but finally it did. Oh, great. Now my dough was full of wood splinters. So I pinched off a piece and rolled it in my hand and patted it up into a patty. Oh, I had wood splinters all over my palms. Not nice. Well, I put those patties onto the cookie sheet and looked at them curiously. Somehow they reminded me of baby porcupines. Well, I slid that cookie sheet into the oven. I remembered that Mama said you should cook pot roast long and slow. So I turned the thermostat on to 275. Well, 45 minutes later, there they sat, still in a lumpy state. I expected them to rise like they were supposed to, light and fluffy, but no, they just sat there and looked at me. Why, I thought I saw Evelyn's face looking up at me archly, too. Okay, Evelyn, I'm just going to fire you up. And I put that cookie sheet under the broiler and turned it on. Well, I made a trip to the bathroom. And when I came back, those biscuits, or whatever you want to call them, were seriously sunburned, and there was a horrible, greasy, smoky cloud in the kitchen. I thought, what will I do now? As I took them out and laid them on top of the stove. Well, right at that very moment, Bob walked in from work, waving his arms through that smoky kitchen. He looked at the biscuits. He looked at me. He picked one up. Ow! It was very hot. He dropped it, and it bounced 1, 2, 3 times into the utility room. Well, he started to laugh. He started to laugh at me and my biscuits. He staggered across the kitchen and fell into a chair at the table, put his head down on the table, howled and laughed while tears were running out and plopping down into dirty little flour puddles on the floor. He would look at me, he would look at those biscuits. Finally, he spoke through his laughter. Oh, why? Why are you baking cow patties? Well, that did it. I fled upstairs and, true to crying brides everywhere, flung myself across the bed and sobbed heartbrokenly. Not from laughter like Bob was howling downstairs, but from failure and shame and, the humiliating thought that he was probably wondering, why have I changed Evelyn's great cooking for this mess? What a trade. Well, Bob came up and sat down on the side of the bed by me and patted me on the back and said, honey, don't cry. I married you for your mind. And anyway, I can eat loaf bread. Well, he went back downstairs, and gracious individual that he was, he cleaned up the entire kitchen, left me whimpering up there, and he threw the cow patties to the dogs. The final humiliation? The dogs didn't eat them either. I've had people ask me if that was a true story. I said, unfortunately, it was all true. Now, you would have thought that after that biscuit debacle, I would have learned my lesson. But no. Knowing my husband's love for crispy Peking duck, I determined I was going to make it for him. Yes, this is another cooking disaster. That Friday, we had gone to eat in the Chinese restaurant in Asheville. It was about 40 miles from home, but it featured crispy duck with pancakes, scallion pancakes, and sauce. Oh, it was a luscious dish. The pancakes so light and tasty with those green onions. And the sauce, Oh, wonderful, tasty, deeply caramelized brown sauce. But the star of the dish was the duck. Golden on the outside, inside so tender, with a skin that was so crisp and golden, when you bit into it, it just crackled. So delicious. But I was getting tired of driving 40 miles to Asheville and 40 miles back to Haywood County. So I decided I could make the duck. I asked our server the method of preparation. Oh, his eyes bugged out when he got them put back in his head and stopped laughing, kind of tamed it down to a little chuckle. He said, "Missy, that's so hard to make. Many steps you have to do. And the cook," gesturing at the kitchen, "he has secret way to make." But I was persistent. I wanted to make that duck. And I said, "Now surely you have seen him make it just many, many times. What did he do?" Well, the beset server mumbled something about putting the duck in water with spices and baking it and hanging it up to dry and searing it. And, well, I tried to put all that together. My husband looked at me. I knew he was remembering the biscuits of 2 months before. And he said, "I don't mind driving to Asheville for duck. I really don't mind. I want to remember duck as a pleasant experience." And he smiled rather sarcastically, I thought. Well, I smiled very sweetly back, but inside I was going to make that duck. Well, we went back home, and I waited a few days until he had forgotten all about the ducky conversation. And one morning after he had just gone to work, I got in the car and drove down to Ingalls, and I found a 6-pound duck in the frozen food section. I took it home. I had to thaw it out somehow, so I put it in the microwave, but it had a neck on it, and it wouldn't fit. So I filled the sink with some water and put the duck in there, and it thawed 4 hours later. Now, I know I didn't have much time, and there were many steps that took several days, so I would have to have some shortcuts. Now, remembering that the server said, first you boil the duck in water with spices, something called 5-spice powder, which of course I didn't have, so I decided to make up my own. Went to the spice cabinet, pulled out garlic salt, onion powder, cloves, whole cloves, red peppercorns, and nutmeg. Poured that all in the big stock pot with the duck, and it started to boil. Oh, it smelled a little bit strange, but I thought that the sharp, spicy odor of the cloves gave it a nice touch. Well, that duck swam around in that mixture for a little bit over an hour, and then I remembered, oh yeah, you've got to hang it up to dry. I had no idea how the cook hung it up to dry, so I went to the closet, got a couple of coat hangers, and I trussed that poor old duck up on those coat hangers and took it out and hung it up on the front porch. Well, when I pierced that duck skin with those coat hangers to hang it up, fat started pouring forth onto the porch floor. It had been in that hot bath for so long, all of the nice padding of fat it had on its little body had turned to liquid. It wasn't drying fast enough. So what to do? Okay. Ever quick with good suggestions, I went and got my hairdryer. And I set to work drying that duck on the front porch. Well, 2 ladies came out of their houses on either side of us. There were middle-aged couples, married couples, who had probably thought they had seen everything on earth, lived on either side of us, and they came out and they were laughing. "What in tarnation are you doing to that poor hen?" said the lady from the right side of the house. Well, I'm drying it out. That's what I'm doing with it, I said, more or less pleasantly. What? Why are you drying it out? I said in my best voice, with just a great deal of dignity intact, I hoped. Well, it's not a hen, it is a duck, and I am making a surprise dinner for my husband. And the lady from the left-hand side of our house, still laughing, said, well, I'm sure it will be a surprise. Well, they wiped their eyes with their aprons and went into their respective houses, holding their sides and laughing as they went. Okay, my duck had finally come to present with a somewhat case of dryness, semi-dryness, and it had surrendered a quarter of its weight to my preparations. So I took it down, took it in the house. Oh, what was the next step? Oh, yes, baking it in the oven with sauce. That sauce was so succulent at the restaurant, but I had no idea what was in it. So once more I made do. I combined Heinz 57 with ketchup and vinegar and onions and raisins, and I slathered that duck front and back and put it in the oven. 300 degrees this time, and I pulled up a chair to watch it cook. Well, 45 minutes later, maybe an hour, it didn't look quite right yet. So I thought, the broiler. So I stuck it right smack square under that boiler and turned it up, and that sauce began to bubble and pop. And even more fat that I didn't think the duck had any left poured into the bottom of the pan. A minute later, poof, the fat ignited. I opened that oven door and was greeted by a blast of smoke and flames. Grabbing the salt box, I flung it in the direction of the fire. Thankfully, it worked. I pulled the duck out, or what was left of it, and set it on top of the stove. Oh, my poor duck. The last and final step was to sear it to produce that beautiful, crackly, golden skin. But as I looked at that duck, it was blackened all around. It didn't appear to have any skin left. So I scraped at it for a good half an hour. I must have peeled that down through all of the muscle layers of that poor duck. I took it out on the porch and set up the little hibachi grill on 2 bricks. Y'all remember those little grills? I stuffed it with charcoal and I lit it up and put that duck on there, smoked it liberally in the flames and in the smoke, and it smelled terrible because the lighter fluid had not had time to disperse. Well, I had done everything I could. I didn't know if it was edible or not. I was afraid maybe it was not edible, but I had no choice. I took a big fork and I was lifting it off the grill to take it inside when Bob drove up. He got out of the car. He came over to the front porch. One look at that duck, he knew exactly what I had done. And yes, he began to howl again. Oh my goodness, he sat down on the porch steps and put his head between his knees. Periodically, he lifted up his head, looked at me, looked at that duck, and he set off again. Well, this encouraged those 2 women to come out of their houses and stand in my front yard. They approached the steps, they looked at the duck, they looked at me, they looked at Bob, and they started up all over again. Well, that was the final straw. I was going in the house. So I had that duck on that big fork and I wheeled around to go in the house. The duck came off of the fork and it went down the steps and then it flew. It was airborne and it fetched up against a mailbox. One of those women looked at that and said between sobs of laughter, airmail. She threw the apron over her head and went back in her house, followed by the other lady who retreated to her home. Well, that was it. I bounded into the living room, left the duck where it fell against the mailbox, and I flung myself down on the sofa. I had had enough. Never again. No biscuits and no crispy duck ever. Thank you.
Thank you, Catherine. I'm sure we've all had cooking adventures, but I can't tell mine like that.